Web3 is really accelerating a trend that we've seen happening over the last several years. It's been driven largely by the COVID-19 pandemic. The pandemic has accelerated a almost 2D environment in terms of where you think about virtual meetings taking place, which is Zoom, the Hollywood Squares approach to conference calls. What we're seeing now with Web3 is an acceleration into the metaverse, where you can actually have an avatar that represents your persona that is able to meet digitally or virtually with other people in a very immersive meeting environment. And as a result of that, people will be able to jump into rooms, be able to acknowledge things like gestures, hand motions, sense of motion better.
How can Web3 change the retail industry for consumers?
It's interesting that worlds like Sandbox are actually opening up retail to new audiences. You have younger generations that are increasingly spending more time in these virtual worlds, and as a result of that, luxury brands and retail landlords alike need to think about the way that they're accessing new audiences.
What does the growth of the metaverse mean to the real estate industry?
I think real estate owners need to be mindful of where their audiences, their tenants, their residents are spending time. And we've seen this over the last decade in terms of the trends with the younger generation. The next frontier is definitely the metaverse itself. Going to these virtual worlds where especially a younger generation is spending more time and being able to give brands or your virtual tenants access to these new types of audiences. It's not just going to be meetings in the metaverse, it's going to be the way you shop, it's going to be the way people might have a second home or a place where they store virtual goods in the metaverse.
What impacts will Web3 have on the traditional real estate industry?
Longer term, the metaverse is actually a way to monetize or even further digital real estate. When you actually create a physical space, whether that's an office building or more specifically, potentially a single family home builder that is building a home, you could provide a digital twin of that exact same home in the metaverse somewhere, thus giving somebody access to a space to live and to store belongings both in the virtual but also physical environments.
What are some new benefits that brands can explore to enhance their customers' experience?
So when you book traditionally through a hotel, you've been given a booking confirmation number, and essentially that gives you the right or guarantees you a night at their property. With an NFT and the digital ownership that is inherent within it, you actually not only could have access to a night at a specified property, but you could have the ability to receive things like discounts on food and drink, or potentially access to special experiences that hospitality provider or partner could provide. For a consumer, it's interesting that by buying an NFT in a specific property, it may not just give you ownership over a single night or specified number of nights. You could have a certain ability to transfer that ownership to a different sister property of that hospitality company and receive nights at a discounted rate outside of the specific geography that you typically travel to. You could also have the ability to trade that NFT with someone else that could have an NFT at a competing property and be able to trade nights or stays with that person.
Can traditional real estate industry benefit from blockchain technology?
If you take the single family home purchase transaction and the amount of paperwork, the amount of intermediaries that are part of that, and then all of the added cost that gets put on top, it's really painful. I think with blockchain technology and smart contracts, you can literally take all of that, think about it in a way where you're compressing it all into a single smart contract that is on the blockchain that is able to authenticate a transaction immediately in terms of you being the sole owner and buyer or purchaser of a piece of property. That in and of itself can remove overhead, decrease the amount of time in a process, going from several weeks or even months down to days. And it also, I think, just creates a much more efficient process for a buyer and seller, where there isn't somebody that is sitting in the middle of them at every single step along the way, also taking an incremental piece of the cost and adding additional fees for both the buyer and the seller at times. When you think about just also security and fraud, when you think about a smart contract that can be written, for a lender, for instance, on the mortgage side, there can be lines of code that can be put into smart contracts that can easily identify fraud in these types of transactions. These are the types of ways that I think that Web3 technology, smart contracts, blockchain, really can have an impact on the way that we think about buying and selling of real estate